Hey everyone, welcome to TechStrong TV for today, Monday, September 21st. We are flying through September. Just another 10 days here and we'll be in October. I hope you had a good weekend. Everyone well and healthy and safe. And it's going to be another busy week here in the world of tech and DevOps, digital transformation, cybersecurity, and cloud native. We've got a great lineup for today to start the week off for you. Let me tell you what we've got in store. Number one, I'm speaking to my friend Spoons, Daniel Spoonhour. Daniel is, I believe, CTO and co-founder over at Lightstep. Before that, he was with Google for a long time. And Lightstep is a sponsor of a conference that we are a media sponsor of called ChaosCon or Chaos Conference. It's from the folks at Gremlin. And, you know, the whole chaos engineering space is something we find really interesting here at Media Ops. So does Lightstep, probably for better reasons than we do. Ours is pure curiosity. They see a lot of what goes on in chaos engineering is directly related to the Lightstep suite of solutions. So I catch up with Spoons about why they're sponsoring ChaosCon, where they see, you know, the synergy there, and just generally what's happening with Lightstep. So do check out the interview and also go check out Chaos Conference. Register. It should be a great one. After Spoons, I'm going to be joined by my friends, the boys from Aqua. Andy Feit, Ronnie Osnott, from Aqua Security. Aqua just came out with a new security study about a year in the making, and we catch up with Andy and Ronnie to talk about what's happening. So that should be a good one. Then after that, we have an episode of one of our new shows. It's the Cyber Heroes Adventure Show. This is episode 2, and it's hosted by Gary Berman. Gary has Chris Kennedy, CISO and VP of Customer Success at Attack IQ, as well as a few other folks on. Should be a great show, and I hope you're going to enjoy it. After Gary's show, I'll be back with the news, and then over to Charlene O'Hanlon, our managing editor. And Charlene has Jamid Rezazi, CIO of Mitel, on today, as well as a great webinar preview. And we have a full lineup of webinars this week at Media Ops. So do check out Charlene's preview. I think you'll find there's something there for everyone. And then after that, we're going to head over to the Analyst Corner with Mitch. Mitchell Ashley has some great video and commentary today. And then I'll be back to close things up. We should be running about 2 hours today. Chock full of good stuff. Let's take a quick commercial and come back with Spoons. As I mentioned at the top of the show, we are sponsoring the the ChaosCon, Chaos Conference. It's put on by Gremlin. It's a really good conference. It's been building. This year's virtual event looks like it's going to be a real can't miss event. One of the sponsors is Lightstep, and Lightstep, you know, the co-founders from Lightstep all basically came from Google. One of them is my friend Spoons, Daniel Spoonhour, and Spoons is, in addition to the co-founder, I believe CTO at Lightstep. He's going to talk to us about why they're sponsoring ChaosCon, why he's very excited about the conference itself, as well as what's happening at Lightstep. So here's Daniel Spoonhour of Lightstep.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us. Of course, this is Alan Schummel from DevOps.com, Media Ops, and we're here as part of our continuing coverage of the Chaos Conference, and I'm really happy to be joined by someone I've had the pleasure of interviewing before. It's Daniel Spoonhour. Spoons is, I believe, one of the co-founders over at Lightstep. And Lightstep, of course, is a sponsor of the conference. And I wanted to talk to Spoons a little bit about, what they're doing here at a Chaos conference and why it's important to them and how does that all play together. Spoons, it's good to see you, my friend. Welcome, and hope all is well.
Yeah, good to see you too.
Spoons, before we jump into ChaosCon, we should really kind of do a little foundation work. Let's talk a little bit about Lightstep, about what you guys do, and let's talk a little bit about you and your role there.
Sure. So Lightstep is simple observability for deep systems. We help folks understand changes in their applications, and whether that's a deployment or an infrastructure outage or whatever. We help those folks get those systems back online and hopefully do that with as little pain as possible. For me, I'm the CTO, and as you said, I'm one of the co-founders. Before Lightstep, I was a software engineer at Google for a long time. And at Lightstep, I've done any number of things, from helping to build out some of the original systems to growing our team, to thinking about how do we communicate and educate folks about observability.
Absolutely. And it's funny, Spoons, you and I did a podcast. It's got to be a year ago, maybe more.
Something like that. It feels like a long time.
Yeah. But beyond everything that's happened in the world between now and then, it's funny how observability has now become, the buzzword, if I could use that term, the buzzword that it is today. Back then, I think people were more thinking of monitoring, management, stuff like that. And now it's all about observability all the time. And of course, I guess that plays well into the Lightstep kind of way of looking at the world.
Yeah, I think for us, really, what we saw coming out of Google is that, Google is a strange and amazing place, but one of the things that's cool about it is you sort of get a perspective on what is going to happen in the rest of the world in a few years, and the kind of complexity that we saw at Google in terms of the services. They didn't call them microservices or anything like that, but in terms of that complexity, it sort of gave us a clue into the kinds of tools that folks in the rest of the world, in the real world, we're going to be needing pretty soon, and that's why we started Lightstep.
Absolutely. Spoons, let's turn to the Chaos Conference, of which Lightstep is a sponsor. So, what are you guys doing at a Chaos Conference?
Yeah, I really like the kind of idea of chaos, right? That you, so it's sort of, that things are going to happen in your production systems, whether you want it to or not. And so the one way that you can be prepared for that is to practice, right? And I think there's kind of an emotional component to it in a lot of ways, right? That it's something that you can practice and become familiar with, and it doesn't have to be as scary as it might feel. And I think, speaking as an engineer that was on call at Google and later at Lightstep, that kind of practice, I think, is pretty important. And I think where Lightstep comes in is really about providing some context and some information to help you build confidence and understand what's happening.
Excellent. So, with the sponsorship, there's booths and there's all kinds of ways to interact with the audience and the attendees. What I find interesting about this space, the chaos engineering space, is the range of kind of people it touches, right? At first glance, you think it's an ops thing, right? Whether you're an SRE or just, maybe more traditional IT ops, it's an ops thing. How am I going to react when stuff happens? But when you look at how they're using kind of chaos tools, it's a security thing. It's very much a DevOps and developer and testing thing as well. It really has expanded beyond that original ops kind of, nugget to handle the whole kind of ecosystem, if you will.
Yeah, I think partly because folks' roles have evolved a lot, right? And that those roles have broadened, and so it's as those roles broaden, they end up touching more and more things, right?
Not only broadened, I think they've overlapped a bit too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
They touch on each other. So someone watching this before, because this is gonna run before the conference and everything. What do you think they should be on the lookout for? What can they get from interacting with the Lightstep team? Oh, who will be at the virtual event live, if you will, that day?
Yeah, I mean, like in a lot of other places, we'll have some observability experts there. I think, I mean, one kind of parallel I think with a lot of the work in chaos engineering is there are components of it that are new, and I think a lot of folks have questions about how to adopt it. Where do they get started, right? It's maybe it's clear what the end is and the glorious future, but we've got to all start somewhere. And I think that's a place where Lightstep really shines as an organization. We've got a great team that can help folks and have done this many times before.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things with the whole chaos engineering thing, Spoons, is everyone's heard the Netflix story, right? And Chaos Monkey and all these things. So they think of it as, the way they think of it is, okay, we're going to make something break and see how everyone responds to fixing it, and how and all of that. And I'm not saying there's not value in that. There's value in that, but that's rather rudimentary, right? I think the whole chaos engineering space has evolved past or beyond that, where there's real kind of theory involved here of, if you have A, you should do B, and if you have B, go to C, and right, how do we spot signs of? So it's not just the idea of inserting something on purpose to see how you're going to react. It's more like the theory of chaos and how do we manage.
Yeah.
Is more at play here, and for our audience, I mean, you get that, right? I get that, but for our audience out here, I think a lot of people still think of chaos engineering as Chaos Monkey, and that's it.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would, and as in many things, start with what your customers expect, right? Like, what have you promised your customers? What do they demand, even? And then work backwards from there, right? And I think this is where observability, I think, is pretty important, because being able to map those expectations back into the software itself and understand, what does this mean for some microservice that's 8 layers deep or something like that, right? Being able to do that kind of translation is pretty important. But I think in all of these things, I mean, this is what we tell our customers as well when thinking about, where they should be thinking about observability is like, well, what matters to your business, right? What matters to your organization? And that's really a great way to guide, I think, that conversation and that journey.
Got it. Spoon, we'll put up the URL and everything for the conference. We've only got a few minutes left. I want to turn back to Lightstep if we can. So, the world's changed, as I said, since you and I spoke last, to a certain degree with this COVID. And of course, you're out west dealing with the forest fires and everything else that 2020's thrown to us. How are things at Lightstep?
Good. So yeah, I mean, we've seen a lot of our customers and a lot of other people in the community are moving more quickly to making a digital transformation, right? So I think in a lot of ways, it's, our customers in the past, maybe when we were talking before, are, sort of more of the early adopter types, but we've seen a lot of organizations with legacy code that have been thinking about things like observability, that are moving to the cloud, that are adopting things like Kubernetes. I think performance is also really important, and I think one place in particular is measuring performance as it's really perceived by your end users. I think especially for a lot of business applications, those were used by people sitting in an office with an IT staff that made sure that the network and everything in between was working, right? But those business apps are being used by people, in their homes a lot now, right? And the performance that they're seeing, the way that those apps are behaving could be pretty different than where it was before, even though the software itself didn't really change. But I think taking that into account in terms of both how you measure and how you think about building those applications, where do you ship data, where do you run that analysis, what kinds of queries can you support, things like that are all pretty important.
Absolutely. Just the interview before yours, I interviewed Mitchell Ashley from Accelerated Strategies Group, and they had just done a research report on these kinds of issues, right? On working remotely and development teams and expectations of in this case the customer is the development team, that remote development team, and the IT ops team has to support them, and so what their expectations are and how they're functioning. And yeah, I mean, I think one of the real issues is at some point, hopefully these fires go out, we get this COVID situation under control, and the new normal sinks in. It's not going to be set your clocks back an hour and go back to where you were in January, right? We're going to move forward from where we are at that point, and how much of it sticks will stick because it makes sense to stick.
Yeah.
Right, because it's a better way of doing things.
Our team was already, I mean, not totally remote. We had a big cluster of engineers in the Bay Area and a bunch in New York as well. But we also have a bunch of folks that have worked from home for years. So we were ready in many ways. And I think, we as a young company, right, we can make technology choices. We don't have a trusted corporate network. We never did, right? So that wasn't a thing that we had to change. But I'm definitely glad that we had some, remote folks so that we could understand, what we would need to do and be ready for a lot of those things.
That was a big part of this report, was that for organizations that already had some remote workers, the lift and learn of that, right? These remote workers already had best practices that they had developed and sharing it with the new people was interesting. Anyway, hey man, it's great seeing you. I'm glad you're healthy and well. Thanks for sponsoring. Well, thanks to you and Lightstep for sponsoring the Chaos Conference. And come back and visit us. It's been too long, man.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thanks.
All righty. Daniel Spoon, our CTO, co-founder at Lightstep, a sponsor of the Gremlin Chaos Conference. This is Alan Schimmel. We'll be right back. Those wild and crazy guys from AquaSec are at it again. Andy Fight, Ronnie Osnot joined me. Aqua just released a new, pretty deep study around container cloud native security, adoption, and Ronnie and Andy are going to give us the highlights of it. So here now is Andy Fight, Ronnie Osnot from Security.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everyone, welcome to another session of TechStrong TV. This is Alan Schimmel, and I'm joined by my friends, the as I call them, the Aqua Boys from Security. It's Andy Fight and Ronnie Osnot. Andy, Ronnie, welcome. It's good to see your smiling faces.
Thank you.
Yeah, good to see you too, Alan.
Of course, we would usually see each other, RSA, at some DevOps or DevSecOps or Cloud Native show somewhere in the world. A couple times, every couple months it would, I don't think we'd go 2-3 months without seeing each other. But, this year, 2020 has other plans for us. So here we are. But it's good to see you and trust you're all well. How are things with AquaSec, with Security?
Things are good. We are fortunate to be in the right space that isn't badly affected by COVID-19. Companies are still migrating and moving to the cloud. They're still trying to be more agile, etc. I mean, in some areas, it's even accelerated the trends. But overall, the world is suffering. We're suffering with it. From a personal standpoint, but business is good.
Excellent. You know what surprises me? Not surprises, but put the COVID stuff to the side if we can for a moment. We're doing our, it's not called the Cube Virtual Summit because CNCF has rules now about using the word Kubernetes, right? So it's a operationalizing cloud native software with Kubernetes. But what's interesting is when we did the call for papers, the call for speakers, I'm telling you, over a third of the submissions were around cloud native security. Container, Kubernetes, cloud native security. And I'm not going to say I'm surprised because I see it from what we see here at DevOps.com, Container Journal, etc. But, excuse me, it was validation of just how important security for cloud native infrastructure. It's really at the forefront of what companies are grappling with. I saw a recent survey, 75% of new applications on AWS are deployed on Kubernetes. So if you have that kind of super majority of apps going out on cloud native and Kubernetes, it makes sense that securing these applications and securing Kubernetes and cloud native would be such a priority. Now, I know you guys recently released it's like a year-long research project on this subject, yeah?
Yeah, so I think, it definitely fits right with what you're saying, which is, a year or 2 years ago, some of these technologies were still just emerging. And frankly, the bad actors out there wasn't enough of an installed base probably to go after, right? You couldn't count on finding a Kubernetes cluster if you pointed at a company. But in the last year, that really has changed. The adoption rates are there, and the opportunity for somebody with malicious intent has grown significantly. So what we looked at in this research was over a period of year, what actually happened. We set out honeypots, and we've been watching them for a long time. We look at the public repos and what's in there, and we're doing analysis on it. And what we found was more than 7x growth in the number of malicious images and attempted attacks that are happening on a daily basis compared to just a year ago.
Wow, 7x.
Yeah, so now it's where people used to say, oh, the risks are malware or ransomware or a denial of service attack on my server infrastructure. At this point, there are definitely real risks if you're simply, as you say, deploying Kubernetes somewhere and you didn't think too much about how to secure it.
Yeah, as Andy said, we moved to a kind of a new phase where the risks are not theoretical anymore, but they're real, right? So probably, attacks on cloud native infrastructure have been around for a while. We've known about these types of attacks for years, but the scope and level of sophistication and the organized nature of these attacks has increased significantly. And this is simply a function of what Andy said before. The broader the adoption, the more attractive it becomes to wide-scale organized attacks that are largely automated based on scripts and tooling that several organized groups that are identified in the report have set up.
Yeah. So my fear is, look, it's great if you're Aqua Security, right? And this is becoming such, coming to the forefront. My fear is, though, is that do people say, hey, I'm going to deploy on Kubernetes? No, you better not. It's a real security risk. Yep. Right? We saw this early on in cloud. I'm going to move stuff to the cloud. Oh, the cloud's not secure, right? That was kind of the folklore out there that people believed. That's not secure. You know, and then compounding that is, quite frankly, you know, deploying on a cloud native stack is not the easiest thing in the world to begin with,
Right.
right? Compared to other choices. So you got something that's not easy to do and has an increasingly high risk profile. Does that stunt the growth? Or maybe it's not a high risk profile.
It hasn't, and I'll explain why. First of all, let's put things in proportion. The risk, the kind of attacks we're seeing right now, they are organized, they are large scale, they are increasing in sophistication, but the end goal of most of these attack scenarios that we see is mining for cryptocurrency, basically abusing your cloud resources, taking advantage of your cloud resources to mine for cryptocurrency. So it's the damage that's done that we've seen is not tremendous, but the risk is very real. And why? Because the techniques that are being used can easily be adapted for other objectives. So you can easily take these methods that we've seen, like supply chain attacks and evading static scanning tools, etc., and then implement them in another way for other types of attacks, including advanced persistent threats and so forth. So we're somewhat biased, by what we've seen because of the way this research was set up, with honeypots, etc. You're waiting to be attacked, but more advanced malicious actors can target a lot more secure environments as well. That said, I think that the risks that are there are not. I mean, Kubernetes is a complex system. You need to understand what you're doing there. I think one of the reasons why a lot of these cloud-based Kubernetes, managed Kubernetes offerings are being adopted is because they do take away some of the risk, the cloud providers, by managing some of that for you, through on EKS, AKS, GKE, and the likes. But it's you do need to be aware of what you're stepping into, right? There has to be. It's like you don't give the keys to your car to someone who doesn't know how to drive, right? So you need to know how to drive this. It's as simple as that. It doesn't mean that this car is more dangerous than another car. It's just a different car.
Fair analogy. Fair analogy. So you gave us some highlights of the research. Any other kind of nuggets that you want to call out to the audience around the report?
I can jump in with a few here. So as Ronnie said, the bulk of the attacks were used for cryptocurrency mining. Probably about 95% of them. The remainder, there were definitely some attacks that were about establishing a presence in that environment for either an advanced persistent threat or distributed denial of service attack later. They would embed themselves and reach out to a staging server, simply letting them know that I'm here. Why don't you send me some communications components that will allow us to control it later. But they didn't necessarily do anything specific quite yet. But we know that the software shouldn't have had that in there. And as Ronnie alluded to, one of the key themes in here was the way that people were getting these attacks implemented and using supply chain methodology. So they would replace a valid image with an image that had something in it that was obfuscated either through encoding or encryption, so that it didn't trigger any signature-based scanners. But when it actually ran, you could see what was happening, and that's what we did to discover a lot of this malware, is to actually run it in a sandbox environment, see what it did, and we would behaviorally identify malicious activity. And so a lot of that was, again, these supply chain attacks of taking a commonly used image, updating it because it's all open source. It's out there in the public repos. They make a perceived improvement, maybe updating documentation or adding a small little insignificant feature. But in the meantime, they also sneak in a little bit of code that will only be discoverable at runtime. And it's those images. People grab the latest version of popular images like Alpine and Nginx and others, and embedded in there are things that they didn't even know.
Yeah, no, we've seen this. I forgot the company we interviewed, but their research team also found within the Docker registry, actually, sound alike kind of Docker images that had stuff. You know what I find funny though, guys, with the crypto mining stuff? What a waste of a good security exploit, right? I mean, because when you look at the amount of money that's generated, it's the same thing with the recent Twitter hack. A month or two ago, they hacked into these really high-profile accounts to, try to get people to crypto mining stuff. But I mean, dollar for dollar, it doesn't seem like a great return on the criminals or on the hackers, whatever you want to call them, the bad actors.
I'll refer to Pulp Fiction, the movie.
Okay.
The opening scene. Remember the opening scene with Honey Bunny?
Yeah.
So when they rob the place, so when they discuss it before they actually go ahead and rob the place, they discuss it and they remember how the previous place they robbed, they made more money off people's wallets than from the cash register.
Right.
And this is kind of a similar approach, right? So instead of you can stage a very sophisticated attack to target some database or something very valuable, a high stake target, which you may or may not succeed, and it's kind of a zero-sum game for you. You either succeed or you don't, and most times you don't, right? And then you waste a lot of effort. With crypto mining, it's much more spread. It's more like pickpocketing, right? You might pick a pocket and you get someone's wallet out and there's not much in it, but you do enough of these and you get enough. It's worth your while. And because it's automated, because it's scripted, they're just trying their luck. And every once in a while, they'll find a place where they can run the crypto miner for days or weeks or months without getting noticed. And that way they'll make money. It doesn't cost them anything, I mean, what's the cost of uploading these images to GitHub or Docker Hub? Not much.
And it's kind of a volume game. If they do enough of it, it adds up.
Yeah, it adds up.
I don't know.
Yeah, but to go back to what Andy said before, yeah, the supply chain attacks are one part. The other part is where they implement, the way they carry out these attacks is by finding vulnerable infrastructure, right? This is how we find them as well. And interestingly, last Friday, just as we were kind of, closing this report and kind of finalizing the formatting, etc., before we published it this week, our team found another attack based on the same kind of techniques, but this time it was on the kind of free offerings that are SaaS services for developers. And they basically found that those services are being abused. They're not targeting the customers using them, they're targeting the services themselves. And this included GitHub, Docker Hub, Circle CI, and Travis CI, where they were basically using similar techniques to abuse their infrastructure, basically setting up these CI steps or builds, where within every build, as the CI was building, within every build, there would be a crypto miner running in the background. And for example, Docker Hub has a limitation of 2 hours on a build, which is a fairly long time for a build. And so they just abuse that. They go for 2 hours, it ends, they start another one, and it's an endless loop.
This is why we can't have nice things. It's just crazy, though. It's crazy. So where do we? I mean, the obvious answer is use AquaSec, but where do we go from here? How do we get a handle on this, move past it?
So I think you said earlier at the beginning, when we started, that People are definitely moving to this technology. I think as we go there, there's the skill set challenge of finding people that know how to set this up properly, not just from a security, but from a configuration perspective, and build these environments. A lot of the things that are happening is around automating that and making that easier, whether it's through a Kubernetes service from one of the big cloud vendors, or templates and infrastructure as code. There's a lot of techniques that are coming out that make it easier to implement, easier to automate, and make sure that you're implementing it with best practices. But then, it really is about applying a security model to that. Everything from looking at your infrastructure, making sure that it's properly configured, testing it, whether that's pen testing or posture management testing, and then looking at your build processes, automating the steps in that. I mean, it's pretty easy to insert, as you're grabbing that code from GitHub or another public repository let's make sure that it is a clean image. We can run it through a sandbox and look at it, and then scanning all of those applications in real time, and then all the way through to monitoring and runtime. It's the same thing we all did back in the day, on our server infrastructure. But as we move to the cloud, I think people lost a little sight of the importance of making sure that end-to-end protection is there and that you're thinking about it. And the automation does make it easier in a lot of ways, but you do have to spend that energy and effort up front to get your pipeline built the way it should be.
Good stuff.
Yeah, I'll just add that, the DevOps has blurred the distinction between a production environment and a development environment.
No doubt. I don't know if people do development environments anymore, separate development environment. It's the same environment.
It's the same environment, and things flow from one to the other very quickly. And so if you want to secure your production environment, you have to start with your development environment as well. And these supply chain attacks really demonstrate that. So, and it's not, there isn't a silver bullet here. There's not one thing you need to do. There's many things you need to do. Some of them are not, difficult to do. You just need to do them, right? Things like authentication, things like limiting access to external, open source repos, scanning, build artifacts as you're building them, using tools like AquaDTA, which is the dynamic analysis sandbox to find that hidden malware that you can't find with static scanning. So there are some things you need tools for, but there are some things that are just best practices.
Fair enough. Guys, we're out of time. It's a pleasure to see you both. I look forward to the day I'll see you both in person again. But until then, this will have to do. Come back and join us soon, though. I don't think we've gotten together in months and months now. It's got to be maybe 6 months.
San Diego, since San Diego, maybe.
Well, so that was November.
RSA actually. No, RSA.
Oh, that's true. Were you at RSA?
I was at RSA, and this was already.
That was the last time I was out.
It was already kind of people were, COVID was in the air.
People were getting sick.
Right, they were wiping the escalator handrails and hand gel everywhere.
That was the last big show, yes.
I got news here. I did the DevSecOps thing on Monday. And then other than that, I stayed at, we had our broadcast booth on Broadcast Alley. I never went to the show floor. And I really didn't go to any sessions. I stayed by my booth. And in hindsight, I'm glad I did. But anyway, RSA's May this year. Maybe by then. We'll see where it goes. Andy, Ronnie, thank you so much. Yeah.
Bye.
A pleasure. Stay well. Stay safe. Thanks for the research report.
You too.
We'll see you soon. All right. This is Alan Schimmel for TechStrong TV. We'll be right back with our next guest. All right, up next, as I mentioned, is a new show in our TechStrong TV lineup. It's the Cyber Hero Adventure Show hosted by Gary Berman. Gary's guests this week are Chris Kennedy of Attack IQ and Adam Pennington from the good folks at MITRE. It's a great show. We'll be doing a few of these a week. We are producing them here at Media Ops along with Gary, and I think they're great. I think you're going to like it. So here's Gary Berman with the Cyber Hero Adventure Show.
Hello, and welcome to the Cyber Hero Adventures Defenders of the Digital Universe show. Today's show focuses on answering the question, what are the strengths and limitations of the MITRE attack matrix? You'll learn about MITRE attack, a globally accessible knowledge base of adversary tactics and techniques based on real-world observations. The attack knowledge base is used as a foundation for the development of specific threat models and methodologies in the private sector, in government, and in the cybersecurity product and service community. MITRE is fulfilling its mission to solve problems for a safer world by bringing communities together to develop more effective cybersecurity. Attack is open and available to any person or organization for use at no charge. Stay tuned to find out more. I'm your host, Gary Berman. Our mission is to shine the light on the people and organizations who keep us safe online while at work, home, and school, and to serve as a business-to-business networking platform for the cybersecurity and IT communities. We've learned that 55% of human communications is nonverbal. That's why we include a video feed, so that you have the option of seeing our guests or simply to just listen. You never know who you're going to connect with and how you'll be able to maximize opportunities resulting from hearing from our guests. As the victim of a series of cyber attacks, I've learned that the only time that you hear about hacking or cybersecurity is when the criminals win. Well, not anymore. Let's begin by saying thank you to today's panel of unsung cyber heroes who represent the countless people who toil in anonymity to keep us safe at home, work, and school. Adam Pennington is the principal cybersecurity engineer of MITRE. His focus is on operations, cyber threat intelligence, and deception, and he leads the team behind MITRE attack. Adam's specialties include deception, cyber threat, intelligence, intrusion detection, storage security, security architecture, attacker observation, and analysis. Hey, Adam, welcome to the show.
Hey, Gary, thank you for having me here today. I really appreciate the opportunity and looking forward to chatting a bit about attack.
Me too. Our next guest is Chris Kennedy, the CISO and VP of Customer Success at Attack IQ. Attack IQ is a leader in the emerging market of continuous security validation. Chris and his team built the industry's first platform that enables red and blue teams to test the effectiveness of their security controls and staff. Their platform supports the MITRE attack matrix. Chris, we're going to learn a lot about what you do today on today's show, but I'd like to ask you and begin by asking you, why do you do it? What is your mission? Tell us your origin story, if you don't mind.
Gary, listen, appreciate a little runway on this. I've had an exceptionally harrowing career. First, thanks for having me on the show. I really look forward to it. And thanks for the good chat, Adam, today. First and foremost, I was born into this industry unintentionally. I was one of the Marine Corps' first information system security officers in the late 90s, responsible for securing the largest post in the Marine Corps, largest base in the Marine Corps, Camp Lejeune. And from that, lived through kind of the birth of the industry and witnessed the Marine Corps rolling out its enterprise infrastructure as a concept, lived through the then malicious worms of the day that made cybersecurity a real industry because the enterprise effects that they could have. Did a good job down there, focusing on the basics, password changes, antivirus controls, policies and training, and got pulled up to build the Marine Corps Security Operations Center when that was kind of a new venture and less commoditized. Concepts of SIM hadn't been born yet. And from that, lived through real state-sponsored attacks. If you can read about them, now historically in the Byzantine series, the Moonlight Mazes, and things like that. When the U.S. government realized, holy cow, state-sponsored attacks are real and can have an impact to U.S. government and military operations. And so that was like hair raising for me in terms of like to be on the pointy tip of the spear for cyber defense for the Marine Corps as a young lieutenant, then captain. Transitioned out after 7 years of that and went to defense contracting and had the opportunity to build the U.S. Department of Treasury's cyber ops program and evolve that into one of the most revered programs in the U.S. government. And we did it in a very effective shoestring budgety way, doing SecDevOps concepts before it was a cool thing to talk about, with an integrated team of threat intelligence analysts, developers, and infrastructure operators all cohesively trying to solve the problem together. And it worked really well. I'm really proud of the team that was there that did that. And then lastly, I transitioned from that after almost a decade to build technology risk management for the largest hedge fund in the world before I got to Attack IQ. And there's anything that I've learned in what you introed, Gary, is that I too have suffered through tons of security incidents. And the one underpinning thing that always struck me was that I am making an exceptionally broad assumption that the technology stack, process, and people under me that run the security paradigm, that run the operations play every day, it's going to work all the time. And it doesn't. And almost every time that I was in one of those incidents, all of that technology stack, all of those people, something broke. And it's confirmed in the Verizon data breach incident response report over the last 3 years. They said every incident they've analyzed says that 82% of the incidents they investigated, all the technology was there, all the people were there, all the process was there, something broke. And so what the realization for me is that I came to Attack IQ under the auspice that there's a good reason for validation. The ecosystems that we work in today and the volatility of them are so complex, you cannot make that assumption. And because of that, validation is now an integral part of the systems engineering lifecycle that is the technology we live in today. And MITRE ATT&CK, being kind of the backbone of Attack IQ, is an excellent body of knowledge that allows you to then illustrate what are the specific threat behaviors that you make these security investments for. And then automation platforms, because of that body of knowledge, enable you to continuously test. And that's a missing part of the equation for my entire career that now exists. And so my mission, my go-to, why I'm at Attack IQ is I think this is a meaningful set of technology that needs to be invested in across every organization, is how they instrument their environments, as well as a paradigm shift in how risk management operations and other tertiary security functions operate, because attack can apply in so many different ways that I think we'll talk about today.
I mean, that is just an amazing origin story and background. And so just a little bit more on a human level, why did you get into this in the first place? Thank you for your service in the Marines. Why did you do it? Why did you first enroll in the Marines?
Oh, well, I mean, I was drawn to the service aspects of that. I thought the Marines had a very cool mission. DNA wise, I've always found myself drawn to those kinds of roles that really stress your intellectual and physical being. And so that's why I've ended up in the crazy places that I've ended up. And so it's terrifically exciting to be at Attack. This is my first startup. This is my first time fundamentally on the sales side. I've always been on the operations or buy side of the house, but it's something I've never done before. And I think it's perfectly primed for me in terms of what I'm like, and to get in there and mix it up and elbow and fist fight this concept into an organization. My role today at Attack IQ is VP of Customer Success and CISO of the company. CISO is focused on corporate security and making sure our product is safe, but the customer success element is awesome. I get to bring those 24 years of experience, wisdom, and skepticism about how your program should work with this attack concept and this great operating platform that allows you to test it continuously and help influence and shape those other CISOs and those other security threat intelligence analysts and operators on how they can take advantage of this to improve their remits as well. And I think that's just awesome that I get to take all of that and then up-level everyone else through my experiences.
Well, with that great background, Adam, please share your origin story with our audience.
So I definitely have some very, very different origins, but I've also been in some similar places. I went to school for computer science at Carnegie Mellon University and focused there on computer systems. So, when I graduated, looking to stay in the computer system space, I was really into operating systems. I got a job as a operating system kernel developer. So, very, very much not in the security space, very, very much in the weeds of the internals. That was short-lived. Thanks to the dot-com crash in 9/11, I was laid off, and job market was not terrific at that point in time. And so I returned to Carnegie Mellon as a PhD student because obvious alternative to being in the real world. And I was focused on researching ways to add security monitoring to computer peripherals. So my PhD dissertation work was around storage-based intrusion detection, doing something tripwire-like inside a hard drive where you're watching block transactions in real time and understanding what adversaries are doing from there. I also did some of my first honeypotting during that time period. I also worked during that time period as a professional sound engineer on the side for money, because being a PhD student doesn't pay that well, which might explain my home setup a little bit.
By the way, it's a great home setup.
Thank you. It's a microphone I'd wanted for a while and just finally did it.
Right.
So when I was close to doing my dissertation, I was interested in getting out of academia, wanted to continue doing research though in sort of the corporate space. And that's how I ended up at MITRE. I was hired really to be a researcher originally. So I started off as a researcher. We have a very large internal research and development program, as well as quite a bit of research we do directly for the government. But I fairly quickly, within a couple of months, got pulled into operations as well, working with MITRE's internal security team. So, similar to what Chris was talking about, we were doing SecDevOps before we had a good word for it. We were dealing with some very real activity that we got to deal with face to face, and built up a internal security practice very much focused around threat behaviors. And it's the first space where I really got into the cyber threat intelligence space and working with groups, working with adversaries, understanding their behaviors and finding opportunities to watch them. And so most of my 12 years at MITRE has been that kind of a mix, leading research while also keeping my hands dirty in operations, both with MITRE internal teams as well as with MITRE government sponsors. As far as my journey with attack, I helped collect the intelligence that was used to create attack.
Wow.
in the first place. Worked with the team as they were creating it, and then verified that as we were putting that first version out, that it was all techniques that we'd seen in the wild, that it was all actually threat intelligence driven.
Well, just on that point, where did you start? I mean, how do you try to get your arms around and create a matrix of these ones and zeros?
I really was, some good intelligence analysts picking apart the data, starting to look at the individual adversary behaviors we'd seen. It also started small. The flag that's over my shoulder that's got 266 techniques in that version. The first version of attack didn't look like that. It had 40-something techniques. Mm-hmm. It was an Excel spreadsheet. It was small, and so we started small. We started with quite a few less tactics. I think we started with 6 tactics, and so everything has just grown as we've seen more behavior and worked with the community over time.
Yeah, an interesting point on that, Gary, is that, if you think about the evolution of threat intelligence as a whole, the commodity of the time a decade ago was indicators of compromise. Like when I was at the Department of Treasury, there was kind of a network of operators within the other federal agencies and some .mil domains that would share with you. And whoever could, get out the freshest IOC to the next organization, they would then use those and put it into their detection criteria. And holy crap, I've got this same actor in my environment as well. And so it was all very temporal. It was very difficult to manage through time because those IOCs stack up in your detection functions and whatnot. And so the pivot to TTPs was an exceptionally powerful thing, but you didn't see that happen in a unified way. Everyone was, that had someone like Adam on their staff and could afford to have someone like Adam on their staff was responsible for providing that up-level concept. And it took, from my perspective, it took MITRE codifying that as a central focal point organization. And then they used their social networks, much like the social networks already existed for exchanging IOCs, to start doing that.
Well, one of the interesting things about that I've learned in my journey through cybersecurity is that the criminals, black hats, if you will, really freely share information. And they seem to me very horizontally, organized and oriented, where the defenders are, for reasons I'd like to ask you about, is this true, are much more vertically, oriented, and is that a valid, statement?
I think so, absolutely, for two reasons. One, both sides of the house monetize it, right? Like if I've got some fresh attacker intel, that can be monetized on the dark web in terms of exploit techniques and things like that, 0 days, whatnot. But then also, there's threat intelligence companies that, collecting that information takes work and they want to sell it. So it's not incentive to share it equally. Second, if you're an organization, what's your incentive to share? If there's not reciprocity in sharing, like all you're doing is giving potentially you're exposing yourself to legal risk in terms of you knew something you didn't, or you had an incident and you shared that information. That's an indicator you had one. And so there's generally been, decades of serious legal concern in how this works, which is why I think attack standing up for the public good of being the focal point collector of this information and sharing it in an open, shareable way disambiguates that, takes the risk out of that sharing out of it. And then, of course, there's obviously legal arrangements you can make for those that are more proactive about sharing with someone like MITRE, so they can create the sightings ecosystem of who and where has seen this and things like that. And that's a wonderfully powerful way to operate because, again, it was all back office operators 10, 15 years ago.
Well, so to that end, Adam, because it's open source and freely available, what's to keep the criminals from learning from it and trying to stay a step ahead?
So that was actually a question we had when we first put it out. It was, something that we went through as a consideration before putting this out to the public. And are we teaching adversaries new things and finally describing this area? And I come from a threat sharing space where I'm very familiar with concerns around sharing, equities, trying to decide, are we making things better or worse? One of the things with attack that we've set down from the beginning is that any technique we add to attack has to have been described publicly somewhere before we add it. Now, that description could be a tweet. It could be a black hat presentation where somebody said this was a good idea. It could be a red team tool where it's been implemented out in the public. We may take proof that it's being used by real adversaries in the wild from private sources. But any particular behavior that we're adding to the attack matrix has already been published by someone somewhere so that we can cite back to it and say they could have found it. We may be pulling things together in a way that may make it easier for people, but it is information they did have access to in the first place. And we also think that the advantage that it gives to defenders in being able to understand these activities, for red teams to be able to pick them up and test with them, and for the cyber threat intelligence folks to be able to talk about them, outweighs any disadvantages that might come from showing it to the adversaries.
Yeah, it makes sense. And so you mentioned earlier, Adam, about the number of verticals or attack vectors, 200 and some odd. Can you just provide an overview of the attack matrix for our audience members who may not be as familiar with it?
Sure. So attack's a knowledge base of adversary behaviors. It's like an encyclopedia of things that real-world adversaries have done in the wild. It's broken up into a couple categories. So across the top of what we call the matrix, which is the form that a lot of people are used to seeing, we have these 12 what we call tactics. And these are high-level adversary goals, things like initial access, privilege escalation, exfiltration, or impact. And so those are describing high-level things that the adversary is trying to accomplish. Underneath each of those, we have this more specific behaviors or techniques. So under initial access, an adversary trying to get into your environment, we might have something like phishing. And so the adversary is sending a malicious email. We fairly recently did a large reorganization of the attack matrix in order to try to even out the level of the different techniques, make them more co-equal in how much scope of adversary behavior they covered, and added a new structure that we call sub-techniques. So it used to be that phishing was the only level of techniques, or used to be a different technique name. But so now under phishing, we have spear phishing attachment, spear phishing link, and spear phishing via service. And so these are still techniques, but they're even more specific ways that an adversary can do it. Drilling down one level farther, we also keep track of the very specific ways that specific adversaries have done a technique. So if you're familiar with tactics, techniques, and procedures, it's probably not a surprise that we've got tactics, we've got techniques, and inside techniques and sub-techniques, we have procedures. And these are the specific ways that real adversaries have done it. So instead of spear phishing attachment, we might have that APT28 sent spear phishing emails containing Microsoft Office attachments. And all of that is linked back to the original open source, publicly available threat intelligence so that people can check our work and see if they agree with our assessment of it. And again, we're not publishing private intelligence in attack. We're referencing back and collecting things that are out there in the wild.
Well, it's really interesting you use the word phishing, and I'll come to you in just a moment, Chris, is in our cartoons, in the Cyber Hero Adventures, Defenders of the Digital Universe that we created, we wrestled with the idea, how do you anthropomorphize hacks? How do you make, ones and zeros in these behaviors, approachable to people who are not, steeped into cybersecurity or technology? So, for example, our character is called Phoebe the Fisher, and it's a very subtle way we characterize kind of half fish, half human character, where she has a harpoon, which of course is for whale fishing, big targets. She has a spear, which is, as you described, for targeted spear fishing attack, and we have a regular fishing rod for, widespread fishing. It was a very interesting creative and communications challenge to take the complexity of what you and all the great folks at MITRE have done, and to distill it into something that people can get their heads around. Chris, go ahead. You wanted to add?
Yeah, I wanted to come up a level on your question because it's the heart of the philosophy of the mission that Attack IQ is and I am into. I think it's crazy when I get that question because I think the industry has rotated on fear, uncertainty, and doubt since its inception. Security is a hard thing to sell. You have to sell through fear, and I think that's bad. I think that you focus on what you know and what you can what can actually defend against. And when you're confident that you have that nailed, then you can start talking about unknown unknowns. And so philosophically, the reason for that is quite simply, security is all about making things hard enough that they move on to the next target. The reason why actors today have been successful, even with using legacy techniques and legacy TTPs, is because they have enormous automation behind how they're attacking. And so when you introduce a change with a new TTP and they haven't had automated, that creates development work for them. If you can adequately defend against a known automated attack mechanism, then they have to introduce work into their life cycle, their workflow. And so every incident I've ever been involved in, it's the dumb stuff. And it's it's not the 0 day, it's the 4-year-old patch that on the legacy system that was there. And then the lateral movement was that the controls were broken and we didn't actually have the visibility that we thought we did. Or the operator didn't see the thing in the chaff because he wasn't trained in threat hunting yet. Or. And so I think that get over the shiny object concept. you have now a body of knowledge that expresses what most attackers know and what most attackers use. When you adequately defend yourself against that, then up-level your organization.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, when I was at RSA this year in my role as a cybersecurity reporter, when I walked into the exhibit area at Moscone Center, it was just, sensory overload. There were just hundreds of exhibitors, bright lights, colors, activity. How, in your assessment, Adam or either one of you, how differentiated is, let's say, vendor number 1 versus vendor number 4,000? I mean, is there a big difference, across the landscape of solutions, technology solutions that are being offered?
So we're at least trying to help vendors express the answer to that with some of the work we're doing around attack evaluations. And so we've done work that we're just getting into the 3rd round of now, where we've done a fairly interesting type of evaluations, a little bit different, where we have a vendor come in, get their product set up in a range where they've got access to it, and they function as the blue team. And then we come in as a red team with a script. We're doing adversary emulation. So where the first round was APT3, second round was APT29, and then evaluating how the vendor did in reference to specific attack techniques and the activities that the red team was taking. And so we rely upon the vendors to tell us what they've seen, show us proof of it, and then we publish all of it. And so we don't put ourselves in a place where we're weighing, who won or who performed better in the particular evaluation. We're trying to put tools out there so that people can actually make those judgments for themselves and be able to take a look at what matters to them. I'm not going to wade into the who's better differentiation, but we're trying to help people make those decisions.
Well, and there's a big, I've been on the buy side for a long time. First and foremost, you're exactly right, Gary. It's a dizzying array of vendors that are out there. They're moving targets, as in, I'll characterize the life cycle of a good security product is Series C to acquisition, and then when they get a product gets acquired by a big company and gets integrated, it gets diluted in all of the other functional capabilities of that product, and so you got to be very mindful of that. You have a strategy of how you want to buy. Do I want to run a bunch of unique products, or do I want one simpler aggregate platform of capabilities? And all of that is always changing. And then you got your business activities on the other side of now we're going to the cloud, and all that crap you bought actually doesn't work there. So you got these architectural ramifications. So it's an exceptionally challenging job just in managing the ecosystem of cybersecurity. And the foundational punchline, the foundational thing is that we often buy these things without functional requirements. What should this thing defend me against? That is a core use case for Attack IQ. You have an attack simulation platform that uses attack. These are the defined techniques and tactics we want to defend ourselves against. Will product A or product B do that for me in my environment? Now you're also armed with the good work at MITRE and evaluations as an additional set of data to enter that conversation with, and how awesome that is to change that acquisition conversation, which used to be, what are my non-functional requirements? How cheap is it? What kind of cool swag do I get? That kind of silly sales stuff versus making it real.
I had heard, and maybe either one of you can validate if this is the case, that in a typical enterprise organization, they might have as many as, I think the number was 47 or more solutions, in their cybersecurity stack. Is that valid? And if so, how do you manage all that?
Yeah, I've heard up to 75, depending on the size of the organization.
Wow.
Some of the big financial institutions that are hyper-federated, they have competing products that do the same thing in terms of the functional space. And, they fight over mine's better than yours, mainly because I don't want to change. So that's just at the platform level. If you get into the GRC side of the house, you start counting what they call functional controls that would be mapped to a control framework. There's over 900.
Wow.
And over half of those are not explicitly platform related. They're like detection logic that are, sophisticated in correlation rules and different aggregate data sets and things like that. And so think about what the implications are as a security executive responsible for defending the firm, where you got to run 75 operations things. That's 75 sets of platters that run, an operations team of people that sit on top of that, a network ecosystem that collects all that information, a workflow that's driven out of it. And if any of it fails at any time, and it's the time that the actors in your house, you're fired.
Yeah, speaking of fired, I also have learned recently that the average tenure of a CISO is not that long, maybe about 18 months, something like that. Is that accurate?
Well, I would say I've heard it called the Chief Information Scapegoat Officer. That's correct. Yeah, I mean, and that's kind of an unfair metric. I mean, I'll also say, I've been a CISO or CISO-like for a lot of my career, and I've lived through incidents. And the reality is, like, how you manage, how you deal with things, and fit for role. It's a very difficult job because of both, the professional pedigrees and requirements it takes. You got to be a technologist, you got to be an evangelist, you got to be a deal maker. You got to be a champion for the company. You got to be a team leader. And, just the reality is the environments are so complicated, and the sophistication required to do it is just a rare breed. And you get in there and you rub the wrong elbows the wrong way and you don't make it, or you get hammered with the incident. And so it requires a special set of skills. And that's why I'm one of the areas where I'm so bullish about where attack is. I've got a customer that was brand new to their institution. Don't need to get into details. And they're like, I'm not ready to do any of this automated testing stuff. And I got to rebuild everything. And I'm like, why do you have to rebuild everything? Why do you think that? Have you done any set of testing to benchmark where you're at? Why don't you pick off the threat actor behavior you're worried most about, do some assessments, and then say, these are all my failure points for this specific threat actor. I'm going to fix A, B, and C. Hey, board of directors, here's my plan. And here's how I got there. And what a wonderfully way to disambiguate this role and the challenges of it when you're working against fixing it. And when something does go bad, you show them, of course it's going to go bad. We haven't invested in that particular behavior to be able to defend ourselves yet.
Well, I mean, let me just jump in one point there that is something I've always really wondered about. So if you think of the capital allocation within the cybersecurity ecosystem, let's just kind of look at the 80-20 rule, that maybe 80% of the resources are in technology solutions, maybe 20% on, let's call it the human element, which was the theme of the RSA conference. And from what I understand, and please, clarify this for me, that the overwhelming majority of hacks are caused by simple human error. Is that reconcilable?
It is to me. Like I use and I'm sorry, Adam, if I keep stepping on you. The Verizon DVR I referenced earlier, like human error is in many layers, right? It's human error to not have good operating procedures for your security controls. Now, I'm not talking about the incident response process. I'm talking about, wait a minute, SANS tells us the number one problem in every enterprise is asset management. I don't even know what I have. Well, if one of your key security controls is agent-based, and you don't know how many assets you have, how do you know you have agents on every one of them? That's a human error. You're not building good operational practices around how you manage your security controls. Or you make a change to the firewall without knowing what the actual implications are from a threat behavior standpoint. And then that aggregates all the way up to the SOC operator didn't have a chance, or the SOC operator didn't see the thing. And so yeah, these all come down to, I think the way we think about our security program, and just inherently because we bought something and attempted to half-ass put it in place, and it's going to work all the time, it's just foolhardy today. And some of that's on the vendor, but most of it's on the organization.
Indeed. And Adam, you had mentioned earlier in the show that MITRE has gone through Sec DevOps, continual improvement, feedback, adapt, improve. What do you think the future of the MITRE attack matrix is? What's it going to look like in 5 years or even next year?
So the enterprise matrix itself is, hopefully stabilizing a bit. So we've had some work over the last few years where we've started ingesting other pieces of other attacks into it. We have a parallel framework called pre-attack that has been out there for a number of years. We haven't seen it leveraged as much in industry anywhere near as much as what most people call attack, which is enterprise attack. And so pre-attack describes actions that happen before an adversary breaks into an environment. 2 years ago, we took part of pre-attack and brought it into attack. So we deprecated something called launch and compromise and added initial access to attack. And we're in the middle of doing something similar right now to the rest of pre-attack, where we're getting ready to deprecate all of the rest of pre-attack and add 2 tactics onto attack, reconnaissance and resource development. So attack's going to look a little bit wider. At the same time, we're evaluating how much it makes sense to integrate other portions of attack into a single framework and a single matrix.
Well, I've never had a scoop, but I'd love one right now. When is this going to be ready?
It's going to be in our next release. We don't have the release date set yet, but it's coming soon. And so this is actually something that we've been talking about out in the public since October of last year. It was something that we designed to come after sub-techniques, though. And so it was put on hold until really after we got a release out this summer. But so works back on it. We're getting it out, and so it's something that's coming pretty soon. We're trying to make sure that the community is aware that it's coming.
Well, we'd be glad to help amplify your message. And as we're wrapping up here, Adam, is there anything else that you'd like to add? That will help amplify your mission?
No, we've been simply blown away by the amount of use, the amount of attention that attacks had over the last 5 years. It was something that started out as an Excel spreadsheet and sort of looked like it when we first got it out the door. It wasn't even really noticed much by industry. First couple of years it was out. A couple of companies started to adopt it, but it's only been really like the last 3 years where we've seen it go wild. And so, we've been trying to do a lot of work last year, trying to help people understand the threat intelligence origins of attack, that it is linked to real behavior. But mostly we're just really thankful to the community that is helping us understand what it is we're missing, what we could be doing better, and just keeping us informed and keeping us honest.
And Chris, is there anything that you'd like to add to amplify your mission?
Yeah, I would. I'll address it in terms of where I see it going from a market standpoint. Like I see attack as kind of the bigger, better what CVE and CVSS did for the vulnerability management markets, right? Like I can already tell you today, our customer community has already identified what I call 26 different use cases of the application of attack. So whatever kind of practitioner you are, people are using attack in this concept of automated testing as a way to validate security. You move across the spectrum of risk and automating the audit process and allowing that to inform your risk management processes and improving and desubjectifying those activities, allowing operations to evolve from what I call pipeline validation, or the SOC actually can get its detection stuff to work, to move to threat hunters, to move to meaningful training injects, and enable, as part of your disaster recovery continuity of exercises, making those more powerful. From your engineering and architecture, using this as a way to define functional requirements and make sure you're buying the right thing now and through time. Threat modeling and tying that into your project SDLC whenever you're buying new technologies and making sure they have security and automating all of that, all the way to corner case use cases. We have customers that are vendors that are using this concept of attack and aligning with it, and then automation platforms like Attack IQ to improve the efficacy of their products, to get themselves training ready to enter MITRE evaluations. So it's really cool to see even merger and acquisition. Like you got organizations like, I'm going to go buy a company. Well, how are we going to figure out if their security posture is good? Well, let's go beat them up and see how they respond. Use this automation platform to do that. Attack gives us all these great TTPs to use. And so that's mind-blowing to me to see in 3 years how this little hobby shop framework that started on an Excel spreadsheet is now turned into one of the most meaningful things an organization can adopt to evolve its security program. And boy, the timing couldn't be better given what's going on in our market dynamics. Like everyone's anticipating business market reductions because of COVID impacts and things like that, the pivot to work from home. Security executives need to be thinking about ways to innovate right now, and they need to figure out how they're going to be able to deal with potentially doing more with less. And this is a key way you can do that.
Indeed. More as we're wrapping up, my final kind of question. First of all, I thank both of you so much for being real life unsung cyber heroes. One of the privileges of doing this show is I get to listen and learn to these incredible people who are selfless. They're all about service, and I hope what we're doing here today, will help. And on a personal note, when I was the CEO of a marketing company that was hacked and ended up losing everything, and the time afterwards, I needed some kind of North Star coping mechanism because of the negative impacts of this stuff. And so I happened to hear a quote from Albert Einstein when a reporter asked him, he said, Mr. Einstein, on one hand, you have, science and physics and mathematics, and on the other hand, you have, the possible existence of a higher authority. How do you kind of reconcile that? And Einstein famously said, coincidence is God's way of remaining anonymous. So Adam, as a last word, can you share with our audience something, kind of coincidental, in your life that's happened that kind of defies logic?
That's a good one, Gary. Adam worked on that.
Well, we could go to Chris while you gather your thoughts if you want. Chris, tell our audience an Einstein moment.
We all operate today under we are human. We are pack animals. We are assumed trusting. And so for your entire career, you have probably bought and assumed and deployed and trusted from a security perspective. And you've missed that validation thing. It's an integral component of systems engineering when you look at the engineering V, and we haven't done it. You just haven't done your annual pen test, your annual compliance. And it was mind blowing for me to think about what this thing could be. And so the epiphany for me, the Einstein moment is man, I have been trusting, but not verifying. And that's bad. It's bad for your career.
Wow. Well, one of the things that was amazing to me is we work in an industry called zero trust. Where do you go from there? Adam, did you want to have a last word? You know what? Let's pivot. Do you have a favorite superhero in your life?
Probably Wolverine.
Why?
I'm a big fan of the claws. The coming back, just always being resilient, but it really comes down to the claws.
Sweet. And how about you, Chris?
I would say the same, man. You got to be tough as nails. You all of us carry a little bit of baggage. Mission oriented, Wolverine was always super driven, and those kind of characteristics. I don't know if it was the Marine Corps, if it was me, DNA, but I would always, a bit of a bad attitude sometimes. That all sounds like me.
on that upbeat note,
unstoppable.
On that upbeat note, thanks again to Adam and Chris for this incredible show. For more information, we'll include our guest contact information and other information in the show notes. In the meantime, thank you so much for what all of you do, and have a great day.
CISO Talk, to hear how real-world CISOs are dealing with today's real-world issues. From enabling secure remote workers to accelerating secure cloud adoption, defending against a pandemic of security attacks and beyond, CISO Talk covers the cyber topics you want to learn about. With your hosts, Unisys CISO Matt Newfield and MediaOps CEO Alan Schimmel, featuring a revolving panel of CISO cyber experts. This is where CISOs talk. Join us on digitalanarchist.com and techstrong.tv.
Excellent stuff. Great show from Gary today. Thanks for putting it up on TechStrong TV, Gary. Next, we're up with the news. These are headlines from around the media ops community, and let's get right to it. Over on DevOps.com, we have harmonizing real-time on-edge platforms. You know, we're starting to see more and more talk around edge and how it relates to DevOps, cloud native, security. I think edge is going to be a big topic in 2021. Then we have a report on cloud expertise now superior to university degree. And this is a good thing, right? I mean, for too long, I think we blindly said you had to have all of these higher level educational degrees, and that somehow that was superior to hands-on experience. I think hands-on experience, especially for technical roles, is kind of always wins hands down. Not that I'm saying you shouldn't get a university degree, not that I'm saying they're not valuable, but nothing trumps hands-on security. Also, we have a great article by Mike Vizard on the IPO wrap from last week. We had Snowflake, JFrog, Sumo Logic. My God, I thought I was feeling like it was 1999 again, partying like it was 1999. But let's not hope we don't have another dot-com bubble burst like we had in 2000, 2001. What are the telltale signs to look for? Anyway, Mike's going to give us his wrap on the IPOs last week, and I think it's a good one for you to check out. Next, Puppet extends Windows support, continuing to extend into the Windows platform there. And then our friends at PagerDuty infuse AI ops into incident management. It's just a matter of time till that was going to happen. Over on Container Journal, the folks at Grafana Labs are now offering an on-premises edition of Prometheus. So for those, for whatever reason, who can't run a public cloud, Prometheus instance can now run on-premises editions of it using Grafana. And then SentinelOne automates DevSecOps on Kubernetes. You know, the security on the Kubernetes space is just red hot. On Security Boulevard, the curious case of SunCrypt. Good article. Patching in the time of remote work. And then our friends at Rangeforce expand security training cloud service. Rangeforce does a nice job. Anyway, that's the articles, a couple articles on our sites. Go check those out. Look forward to your feedback, but there's so much more to read on the sites. Enjoy them and visit them, and we'll move on with our show. Right now, that means turning things over to Charlene O'Hanlon, our managing editor, who has a great interview today, as well as a preview of what is a jam-packed week of webinars here on MediaOps. There's something there for everyone. Listen to the previews, pick which webinars you want to attend, and get to it. Charlene, take it away.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everybody, welcome back to TechStrong TV. I am Charlene O'Hanlon, managing editor at MediaOps, and I am just so excited now to have this conversation with Jamshed Razi, who is CIO of Mitel. Jamshed, thank you so much for having the conversation with me, for joining me today. I'm really excited to have you here.
Hi everyone, thanks Charlene. I'm just pleased to be here today, and thank you for the opportunity.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Well, I'm especially interested in the topic of shadow IT. I know a lot of organizations are dealing with this. It's kind of an issue that's been going on for a long time, but I believe the pandemic has kind of exacerbated it for a lot of organizations. So interested in getting your thoughts on shadow IT and what organizations are currently facing out there. What are you seeing and hearing?
Sure. In terms of shadow IT, I mean, shadow IT has been around almost forever, so
Right,
it's
yeah.
not anything new for the IT organizations. But I think with the pandemic and the current situation, that was kind of escalated, I would say, in terms of shadow IT, just due to the needs of employees of any organization or every company when they had to work from home or for remote work. I think that the whole shadow IT got escalated, but in reality, and it's been always there, the biggest challenges with shadow IT are obviously number one is the security and the data integrity and the breaches that can happen, or bad permissions, or anything that you can think of it in terms of the security. And then the second, really the compliancy piece and regulatory and compliancy piece. And like stuff like HIPAA or GDPR, SOX and SOX 2 and so on. Those are all the challenges that we have been seeing with shadow IT, and they are continuing at the escalated level, I think. And I can talk about the financial impacts. Those are the biggest risks, like in understanding the contracts, what that contract is. If I am going and getting a SaaS solution as an employee, what am I obligating the company to? How does it fit into the rest of the technology landscape in the company? Or, what are really the vendor licensing obligations that each organization will have? Because sometimes you go for freemiums, but not understanding the contract, it may actually be a big obligation for an organization. Those are the biggest challenges that I see and I hear from others.
That's okay. And I agree with you 100%. There are so many different variables involved with shadow IT that I think, employees in the rush to remain productive when they are working from home, maybe a lot of times they just didn't think about, the potential for issues that might crop up from shadow IT. I mean, it's easy enough in the office when, you need to spin up a cloud instance or something like that. You just pull out your credit card and voila, you've got an AWS account. But, working from home, there are so many other, as you said, freemium type applications that are out there that are, great to start with, but they do kind of end up being like this big black hole for expenses. So, and also the issue of compliance that you brought up, that is also something I think it's going to be rearing its ugly head in the next 6 months or so, as we kind of see what the repercussions of a lot of these shadow IT implementations have really kind of done with the privacy of our data and our sensitive information. So what can companies do now to maybe kind of rein in what's been happening so far?
Sure, and couldn't agree more with what you just said, Shirley. I think that's exactly it, and this will be different from one company to another company and one organization to another organization. I think at the end of the day, it comes down with this pandemic and the current situation. I think a lot of IT departments or CIOs, they probably were not, plan for a situation like this. They did not have the right tools or equipment for the employees that they can quickly, move into a work from home or remote working scenarios, right? And that created some of this issue, like escalated, as I said at the beginning of this conversation. But I mean, I think a proper planning in terms of, at Mitel, we're as you know, we're one of the leaders in business communication and collaboration. So we've got all the, state-of-the-art tools that we need to enable and empower our users to work from home or remotely. And for us was a very smooth transition with, as we have, my team meetings and other solutions that people our customers and their users can utilize. But I think a proper planning and then also a process in place. I mean, even before the pandemic, we've got a process internally that if you are going to buy, whether on your credit card or on a PO base, and it needs to go through that whole vendor management and purchasing process, right? Like where we have the POs that goes through our contract management team, and then they look at it, and then one of the check marks is the IT involved, is the security team involved, and how are we going to pay for this? And then comes also, after all of that checks, it comes to the IT solutioning team that, does this solution really fit into the application landscape that we have, the technology landscape that we have? So those are the steps that we have taken at least, and the processes that we have in place to overcome this big challenge of shadow IT. And I know it's not easy in a pandemic situation, but again, tools like being prepared and have planned for, tools like making sure those employees, they have their laptops, they have the equipment, they have their teleworker system that they can actually dial in from anywhere, from any device. That those really will help, and a one-stop shop type of solution where you have the application that you do your videos, you do your audios, you do your web sharing, document sharing, presence and IM and everything. That will really, really help in many cases to overcome this big challenge that most IT departments and organizations actually are dealing with.
Well, I think a lot of organizations have a pretty decent handle on how they kind of work with their employees to kind of reduce or mitigate shadow IT within the organization, by instilling these guardrails, if you will, much like what your organization has done. When it comes to situations such as the work from home, which is everybody admits nobody was really prepared for this. I think the only organizations that really suffered little to no disruption were those that were pretty much all remote to begin with. So, I think that because organizations were just kind of stretched to the limit to just trying to get their employees up and running, working from home, I think the rules were relaxed a lot when we're talking about spending money for applications, for solutions, for new office chairs. I mean, people got to have their stuff. So, so do you think that maybe kind of this phase two, as we kind of maybe move into either a seriously full-time work from home deal or a hybrid work from home, that maybe because of what has happened, that organizations are maybe going to take a second look at shadow IT and maybe find ways to kind of enable their employees to work as they see fit, and maybe that does include a healthy amount of shadow IT.
Absolutely. I completely agree. I think, Charlene, what we learned from this COVID-19 era, I call it, is really, it has changed our plans. Our like when organizations and CIOs and IT organizations were planning for disaster recovery, business continuity, I think this is part of that. This is no different than any of that. I mean, we definitely are not going to back to normal in terms of having everybody in the office. I think that at the minimum, a hybrid scenario is what it's going to work like. Like if some, again, depending from one organization to another, some they had 10%, 20%, some they had 60% of their workforce working from remote. But I think in this scenario, if we generalize it, it will be a scenario that the organizations, they need to look at, okay, how do I enable and empower my 50% of my workforce to work from home? Okay, even after COVID, because that also has its own benefits as well, right? Like in terms of working from home from a productivity perspective, from it depends from one scenario to another scenario. But I think what I can say for IT organizations and CIOs, I see this as part of the whole business continuity planning. That we want to make sure that the users they have the tools they need, they have their laptops, if they are asking for an extra monitor, not a problem. Simple things like that. An extra monitor and a audio, video, speakerphone will really go a long way when you're working from home, 8 hours, 10 hours on video calls on a daily basis. And what kind of a tool you have, right? In terms of your communication and collaboration platform, right? Can you easily, collaborate with your colleagues? Do you have a chat pattern? Do you have an iron presence and a way to do sharing and document sharing and team, right? Like working as a team, like same way you would do in the office, part of the meeting. I think that's what needs to happen, making sure that you are ready for scenarios like this.
Yeah, I agree, and I think shadow IT is definitely part of a larger conversation around how organizations are going to work with their employees to make sure that they're not only productive, but that they're also happy and engaged and informed. Because I think communication is probably the most important element that any organization can offer its employees at the end of the day. So.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And communication collaboration is the first thing, is the foundation to all of this. And the more CIOs and IT departments, they communicate with the organization, with their plans and what the plans and what are available to them and how they are going to empower those users, will actually help very much with heading off that shadow IT.
Yeah. Well, I think we are closer to the beginning than the end, unfortunately, of this pandemic and all of the long tail things that will, result. So I think we've got some interesting days ahead. But unfortunately. Yes. Well, Jamshid, thank you very much for having the conversation with me. I really appreciate it.
No, thank you for the opportunity. It was great to meet you, and thanks a lot.
All right, great.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, everybody, please stick around. We've got lots more TechStrong TV coming up, so stay tuned.
And transformation leaders most every